what is the one thing that the rest of the Western world does well that America refuses to do? And I'm not talking about the American healthcare system.
What is the one thing that the rest of the world does well?
That America refuses to do, and I'm not talking about the backwards American healthcare system.
Okay, the first thing that comes to mind is make chocolate.
Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one. For sure, the rest of the world does a very good job with the chocolate, and the Americans refuse. Although I do believe there are some individuals in Hershey, Pennsylvania that would beg to differ with that opinion.
I'm sorry, counselor, I cannot give this to you. American chocolate does not hold its weight against the chocolate from Europe and get around the rest of the world. So,
okay. So so the rest of the world makes chocolate well, and America does not. The rest of the world does healthcare very well. American healthcare quality can be very high, but America healthcare pricing is absurd, preposterous, insane.
That's fair.
Delusional.
Yes.
Anything, other things that the other parts of the world do very well that America refuses to do well?
Things that America refuses to do. I mean, there are certain technological advances that are more standard in other places around the world. But as far as, like, I'm just thinking about it as a consumer, public transportation,
But Chicago and New York, by the way, are the exception, because Chicago and New York have great public transportation.
Yeah, it's maybe not as safe as some of the other places around the world.
Not as good as this. No, so public transportation, electronic payment for like petty cash, like buying a coffee
and the last
or
thing
whatever.
I will say is that there are definitely places around the world, specifically Europe, where the education systems, I'm not saying that the education's better, but the system works better in that it's a little bit more fair as far as the cost.
Well, no, I mean, you can get, here in Italy, not to make it, no, this is my backyard at the moment, but 9,000 euros gets you a full year at some of the best universities in Europe.
Yeah.
You can't get a cup of coffee in America for 9,000 euros at a university.
So there are certain things, but generally speaking, listen, we have the strongest economy in the world.
No. This is not a time to list the great America.
No. I understand. All I'm saying is that there's definitely things that we don't do great in America, and then there's things that are pretty damn good.
That's right. But today's topic is things that are done in other parts of the world that are very good that America might think about doing. So a high quality education system, which we have, but at a better price.
I'm curious to know, what are these so-called things that we don't do as well?
Very good healthcare system, but at a better price. Electronic, widespread, efficient electronic payment systems.
Okay.
Good chocolate.
Yes, those were mine. But now tell me where you want to go with this.
And a very intelligently administered, high quality sovereign wealth fund that invests in the interests of the nation state, as they have here in Italy, as they have in Dubai, as they have in many a developed nation. Norway, I think that maybe the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund may be one of the greatest investment funds in the history of the world. And America is one of the greatest investor classes in the world. They have beautiful, brilliant investors like yourself and Julian Robertson and Stevie Cohen, Paul Tudor Jones.
I love how you so eloquently confuse a bull market with brilliance. It's very eloquent, and it's
really.
Yeah.
So you think the reason that the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund is one of the most highest returned, and why the Norwegian society is one of the most developed and has some of the best chocolate, electronic payment systems, low cost, high yield education and healthcare systems is a function of a bull market?
My feeling about the creation of a sovereign wealth fund is very different from yours.
Just surprise.
Yes. I didn't actually know what side of the fence you were going to be on this, and I was hoping that we wouldn't be on the same side, and we are clearly not. I am not a fan of the concept of sovereign wealth funds for a lot of reasons. And the primary reason is conflict. Norway, and you bring up Norway as an example. Norway is a tiny country. It's like the size of Massachusetts. I mean, as far as their GDP of Norway or Rhode Island or something like that. You're not talking about, I don't think it's apples to apples. And I think for the U.S. to create a sovereign wealth fund that has so many inherent conflicts and will be such a lightning rod for political favors and quid pro quo. All these things I feel like the list is endless, and I could just imagine the lobbyists who administers. How do you have like an independent, objective team monitor a sovereign wealth fund that in a country the size of the U.S.? I just don't understand it. I don't even know how it could possibly be.
So for sure, listen, I'm not going to say that there's not a conflict of interest with a sovereign wealth fund as it relates to, private interests, whether it's the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund or the Dubai sovereign wealth fund or Kuwait or, Canada for that matter. But I would ask you this: if there's concern about the conflict of interest inherent in a sovereign wealth fund, which obviously there is, why is there not concern about the tax subsidies in the U.S. tax code for people like Elon Musk or the oil? Isn't creating tax subsidies for private business the same conflict of interest manifested in a different financial mechanism, but it's the same thing. I think it is. No, I think it is actually. But
I appreciate that you think it is. I don't think it is. I think that, do we have a problem with the tax code? And the answer is we absolutely do. Do we have a problem with creating an incentive to get individual entrepreneurs to raise capital, to commit to certain types of innovation through tax subsidiaries or tax credits, whatever it is? And the answer is, I don't think so. That's how capitalism in America works. States will offer certain businesses tax breaks to stay in certain places or to come into their states. States will, individuals, we as a country, we offer, if you innovate a certain way, we will commit money, whether it's through AI, whether it's chip development, whether it's electric cars, whatever it is, because there's a bigger picture. And, whether it's solar panels or whatever else it is. Yeah, I think is it okay for a city to offer, let's say, when we first built our first company in Chicago, the city of Chicago had a plan where they said, we will give you tax credit of, let's say, up to $100,000. I don't remember the number. It was less than that. But let's say it was $70,000. That made a difference when we were a new startup, just building stuff out. Yeah, we're in a different, I think that's totally fine.
Yeah, I mean, of course, when you use those examples, when I talk about the world's richest man who's worth $300 billion and has the largest electric car company in the world.
Yeah, but he didn't at the time. He didn't at the time.
But right now he still is a beneficiary.
So the system worked in spite of the fact that it's Elon.
The system worked, and that he got rich selling tax credits. If it wasn't the only reason Elon Musk is a billionaire is because he learned how to exploit the U.S. tax code.
You don't believe that, do you?
I believe that one of the greatest skills he has demonstrated is the ability to use lawyers and accountants to exploit the tax code to his benefit.
I am not an Elon Musk fan at all. In fact, I can't stand the person right now. But I do give him all the credit in the world for betting on himself and for his genius in what he has created. I cannot deny him, and it's not about tax credits. I did not buy my first Tesla because I got a $7,000 tax credit.
But that $7,000 tax credit was the difference between for Tesla that being a profitable or losing sale.
I don't know the answer. I don't know if that's actually true, but even so, that's not the reason that Tesla was successful. And that's not the reason he's the richest man in the world or whatever he is. Listen, the concept of a sovereign wealth fund, getting back to that bigger picture, I think for certain economies, like if you said to me, El Salvador wants to create a sovereign wealth fund to invest in Bitcoin, digital assets like they've done, or other things like that, I get it. If you say, Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, they're a one-trick pony from an economy standpoint. They need a diversification. It doesn't make sense for certain economies that are either dependent on or are one-trick ponies to have all their eggs in one basket. And so to create a sovereign wealth fund in those places, Norway included, yes, it makes sense. But the reality is for the U.S. with a diverse economy and absolutely no need for a sovereign wealth fund. What are you going to do? Try to make an extra couple $100 million, $1 billion? I mean, what's the point? The answer is, and then to create the kind of conflicts and dissension, you're going to make more people mad than you're going to make happy. It's going to be a political lightning rod. We can't even agree on the Fed's role, and you're going to agree on the role of a sovereign wealth fund to commit $1 trillion in capital.
You're already. My point is, you're already there. You're already the tax code and the central bank effectively wears all of the same conflicts that a sovereign wealth fund would wear. And so if you're already going to walk around wearing all of the conflicts of having a sovereign wealth fund, which we do by virtue of having a central bank that does what it does and a tax code that picks winners and losers the way that it does, at the very least, give yourself a bankroll to invest in enterprise that is in the national interest in some way. And at least where
we already have it. We already have it through exactly what you said, through tax code. There was a time when the US government in 2008 invested because they had to in different companies in the financial sector, in different companies.
Well, that was an extortion. That was an extortion racket from the banks. That wasn't a discretionary investment. That was either you invest in us or we bankrupt, we create the Great Depression. Extortion is not the same as an investment.
The U.S. government made money on that trade, so it wasn't that bad a trade. They made money. But my point
they
is,
like to say.
Well,
and if I give you an extortion racket and then you make a return on the extortion, you feel better about the extortion?
No, I don't feel better, but they have a role to provide in certain cases for the good of everything. They have a role to essentially be that safety net. And we've learned that role can be very effective. That role is actually much more effective than letting certain companies, die. But that said, the role, again, I'm going to get back to the sovereign wealth fund, which started this whole thing. The role of a sovereign wealth fund and the conflicts created from that and how they make their investments. I've never seen anyone happy with it other than in a bull market. You get a 10, 15, 20-year bull market and everybody walks away going, oh, this was a good idea because you could have stepped in poop and you would have made money. That may not be the case forever. Even though I'm a positive drift person, that might and won't be the case forever. And because of that, I don't think it's nearly as easy as you think. And
I'm not saying it's easy, but let me even go one. Let me take this to my broader point. In a perfectly functioning sort of free market economy, the investment capital and private enterprise would form businesses that create value for society, and you would have a high level of adaptability and efficiency and price discovery and good products and good results. That's sort of the fantasy of the American economy, and certain subsets of the American economy actually function that way. But then there are other sections of the American economy which are effectively monopolized or oligopolized by a captured government, healthcare being an obvious one, even the cable bills, the phone bills, the FCC, all the things we would all complain about and we're all familiar with. And then there's other things where, like, my God, I can buy a roll of toilet paper between Costco and Walmart for 10 cents or whatever it is, right? But the reason that you have political rhetoric that has traction, and this is my opinion, obviously, whether it was for Donald Trump on his rhetoric about, the policies he advocates for, or Kamala Harris and the policies she advocates for, or any of the recent political predecessors, Bernie Sanders being the one that really sticks out in my mind. The reason there's rhetoric about providing more access to education, providing more access to healthcare, middle-class tax cuts, housing benefits for the middle class, all these types of things. The reason that political rhetoric has traction is that there's very much the belief that the U.S. economy works tremendously well for the ownership and investor class, which is they refer to as the 1%, and it does not work well in the interest of the majority of the people in the country. And so whether it's So there's a political argument that says, well, we need to reform the tax code to tax the rich or subsidize housing or whatever. It could be with the people debate that argue about rhetoric about the tax code to try to rebalance or redistribute wealth, or people argue about central bank policy as to whether the central bank is working for the rich or working for the poor or whatever. And I feel like having a sovereign wealth fund is a great opportunity to invest in, even if the investment is just long the S&P 500 or long, whatever, some sort of, broad global indexes or whatever it is, that the returns from the sovereign wealth fund could be, instead of that, it's a great way to reallocate resources, to redistribute resources, would be to have a dividend from the sovereign wealth fund that goes to to designated segments of the population, as opposed to taxing the rich or subsidizing this or that the sovereign wealth fund is an opportunity to create a basket of returns that would allow a politician to rebalance some aspects of the scarcity in the economy without. So in other words, right now it's like, oh, we're going to tax the rich and give the money to the poor. Like that's sort of the classical left-wing rhetoric, right? Or we're going to put price caps or all these sorts of things, which there's a bunch of, I think, very good reasons why that's misguided and potentially really bad for everybody. But if you have a sovereign wealth fund that's long Elon, you own Tesla stock and Amazon stock and the S&P and whatever, but if your income is below a certain number, that you get a higher level of it. The same way that if you're a resident of Alaska, you collect an annual dividend as an Alaska state resident, because there is an Alaska state oil fund, right? That's a sovereign wealth fund for the state of Alaska. So it's
it's different, but yes, I understand.
You see my point. And yes. So I accept your suggestion that the sovereign fund is a domain of conflicts. I'm simply saying that we're so far past preventing conflict of interest between the tax code and the central bank that why not lay in an asset? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I'll tell you why. Because there's two different roles here. I feel like the role of government is a role of facilitation, whether it's services, whether it's security, policing the world, supporting the world, making everything secure, whether it's whatever it is domestically, regulatory wise. The government's role is one of a facilitator. You're asking a facilitator, and they would admittedly say they are not investors. They are not business people. They are not entrepreneurs. They're politicians. And so their role is to understand that, like, people mess up when they start thinking about politicians. I don't look at any politician. My one requirement for politicians personally is that they're smart. People go, why can't you, why do you think of Trump this way? I don't give a crap about Trump. I just think he's a moron, and I can't support a moron. And I worry that politicians run the risk that if they're not smart, that scares me, because their role is not to be a business person. Their role is not to be an investor. Their role is to understand how politics works and to facilitate a system that works, not to mess it up, not to go in there and disrupt everything, not to be a hero, not to make it about themselves. The goal of a politician is to make sure everything runs smoothly, like a really good waiter. I don't care what your name is. I just care you do your job. And man, I am so happy. Okay. You get a big tip for doing your job, and you don't have to go overboard, whatever. Just be nice and do your job and be smart. We ask the same thing from politicians. Just be nice, be smart, do your job. And your job is to make everything run smoothly. I'm not looking for that politician to build a business. I'm not looking for that politician to hire or be a money manager. This is not their role. And what scares me about what you're discussing is you're asking politicians to get out of what they're good at into something which they're horrible at, which is what the private sector should take care of. And I don't want to say, hey, you know what? I mean, they're admittedly going to go, we can't do this. And so they're going to say, okay, who can do this? And BlackRock's going to raise their hand. And next thing you know, we're going to be giving $1 trillion or $5 trillion to BlackRock to manage. And then BlackRock's going to say, okay, I'm managing the sovereign wealth fund. Great. Then everybody sucks up to BlackRock. How's that? That's not capitalism to me. And so that's my issue with the whole sovereign wealth fund thing. Don't ask the government to do something that they shouldn't do. Their job is not to risk money. Their job is to spend money and to be smart about how they spend money and to make the system continue to work.
So I would love nothing more. It would warm my heart to agree with you. I wish at the highest and most sort of Peter Pan aspirational level, I do agree with you. However, the horses have left the barn, sir. The ships have left the port. The chickens have flown the coop. And the reason that I say that is this. Were it to be that the government's only job was to be that of facilitator, then the most important thing that happens in Washington, D.C. would not be the special tax exemption room in the Dwight Eisenhower executive office of Washington, D.C. But because the single most important thing that the government does is decide which special interests, should the cherry farmers get a tax break? Should the startup stockbrokers get a tax break? Should the taxi drivers get a tax break? Should the electric car companies get a tax break? Should the oil companies get a tax break? Down the list. But because they're basically by virtue of the way that tax exemptions, loopholes, and beneficiaries are specifically targeted and given specific financial resources through specific decisions of politicians who are not smart, but rather are collecting money from that special interest in exchange for creating the tax benefit. And that if I'm going to create the tax, if I'm going to say to the cherry farmers, you guys have no taxes because we believe in cherries, that's equivalent of the sovereign wealth fund investing in cherry farms. I wish the government was only a facilitator, but the government is well beyond facilitation because they utilize tax exemptions to specifically allocate capital to specialized industries in a way where all of the returns of that investment, the tax waiver, go to the private individuals who own the cherry farm or the electric vehicle company or the vaccine company. Whereas at least with the sovereign wealth fund, there's an opportunity to capture the returns from those allocations to the special interests in a way that it might, maybe, potentially, possibly, it's like, one of the jokes that some of my friends in Moscow used to say is that the city of Moscow became much nicer when the level of corruption went down by 50%, because now that the mayor only steals half of the money, there's more money available for parks and lights and trees and subways. And so right now, 100% of the benefits of the sovereign wealth fund, as assigned by virtue of the tax code, go to the oligarchs who own the cherry farms and electric vehicle companies. Whereas at least if BlackRock is managing the sovereign wealth fund, half the money will go to Larry Fink, which is an outrage, but at least half the money will be available to go to someone else, as opposed to the U.S. government providing the capital by virtue of the tax code, and 100% of the returns going to the oligarchs, with the sovereign wealth fund that at least, even if 10 cents on the dollar comes back to the people, right now the people are losing 100 cents on the dollar. That's honestly my logic. It's not that I disagree with you. I'm just starting at maybe a more cynical position, which is at the moment, we're running a sovereign wealth fund using the tax code where 100% of the returns go to the conflicted special interests that are bribing the politicians. Whereas if I was to, instead of using the tax code to allocate the money, if I was doing the allocation via a sovereign wealth fund, via the U.S. sovereign wealth fund, that at least some percentage of the returns could be recovered and reduce my tax bill and your tax bill in the process.
I'm not sure where to start, except that
you agree, and I've changed your way of thinking.
You can't change your way of thinking on this one because it doesn't. Like, again, there's a big difference between the state of Alaska handing out a check for oil premiums and investing money
and the people's dividend, which you're
and
against.
The people's dividend. Yeah, it doesn't work that way, and it will artificially change I think the curve in the market, no, it doesn't work that way. I'm not.
But explain to me specifically how, because I'm saying that the tax exemptions are equivalent of investments, but 100% of the return on those investments goes to the recipients of the tax exemptions. Whereas with the sovereign wealth fund, some percentage of the benefits could be returned to the people.
So let's go back to Elon Musk creating the electric car.
And let's say instead of a $7,000 credit, it was a $7,000 investment.
Did I benefit from him doing that? I'm going to argue yes.
Would you have benefited more if you got the people's dividend?
I doubt it. With no electric car?
No, you have the electric car.
How would I have the electric car?
Same $7,000 credit for Elon.
No, I understand, but how would I have the electric car? How would I have got it? He never would
every
have had
time
the
he makes the electric car. No, he has the same incentive. He gets the same $7,000. His experience is the same. It's just, are you getting $7,000 as a tax credit, or are you getting $7,000 as an investment credit? The difference is the back end on the tax credit is all the profits go to Elon and you can take a hike. Yeah. And on the back of the investment credit, you're getting the back end people's dividend, plus you have your electric car.
No. I understand what you're saying. I don't think it works that way. And I don't think that's kind of, if you do that, the incentive's off the table. The other way, it's getting these guys to invest in themselves. So like the question is, would Jeff Bezos be Jeff Bezos if what you suggested was the alternative, or would Elon be Elon or anything else? And I don't.
But Elon's a great example because Elon is obviously brilliant. Obviously, I know, but Bezos didn't build his business on the back of American tax credits, and Elon did. So I'm just saying because my point is tax credits are a sovereign wealth fund, but worse
I understand,
because there's no return.
But Bezos built it on all of his distribution network is built on the back of tax credits. For where he built out. Wherever Amazon wants to go, if Amazon wants to build something somewhere, a distribution center, basically.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay,
I understand.
That's all I'm saying. And so
what if we take the Amazon tax credits or the Tesla tax credits, and instead we make them investment
I'm
credits?
arguing that system actually works. The fact that those guys became the richest people in the world, great. They did it. They deserve it. But it also benefited the consumer. If we're just investing and there's no incentive to the entrepreneur.
Why is there no incentive? I don't understand why you say there's no incentive for the entrepreneur.
Because it's not the same incentive, because they're not the bet is not on them. It's a different bet.
Is. They're getting an investor, they're getting a capital investment instead of a tax credit.
There's a difference between getting a capital investment and forcing somebody to invest in themselves. And I think that's the difference. And I don't think.
And what is that difference?
I don't think Amazon becomes Amazon or Tesla becomes Tesla or any of these guys that needed those tax breaks to get whatever, to accelerate the process are where they are today under the sovereign wealth fund concept. And again, we're too big for a sovereign wealth fund. We're too big. Our sovereign wealth fund will be, when you look at Norway's sovereign wealth fund as a percent of their GDP, it probably makes sense. When you look at Saudi Arabia's as a percent of their GDP, it makes sense. When you look at ours, it's impossible. We'd be bigger than all the markets. Certain things don't work. That's all I'm saying. Look, I love the idea that I think it was Trump and then did Biden or somebody. I think they both said, we like the idea of a sovereign wealth fund. I think both politicians said yes. I know Trump did. I think Harris did, but I'm not sure it was Harris or Biden. I don't remember who. My point is, I don't like either of those positions. I don't think they understand the risk in that position, and I don't like it. I can disagree and still like the politician because we're not going to agree on everything, but I don't think either of them understand, the inherent conflicts in a sovereign wealth fund of a country of our size.
And I think that they do understand the conflicts and that's what attracts them, because I believe that they believe having a sovereign wealth fund will make them more powerful and more godlike. So if you can control
the tax, until it doesn't work. It will until it doesn't work. Like everybody assumes, oh man, you know what? I would have if we had a sovereign wealth fund, I would have put it all in Amazon. They forget the stocks they would have put it all in that went to zero. That's all.
Right, but also if you're a politician, it's not your money. You don't care. You're playing like the abuse of taxpayer money is the number one most offensive thing that happens in the United States, whether it's the bank bailouts, whether it's the tax giveaways to the oil companies or Tesla, or whether it's Harris, Trump, or Biden's desire to raise a sovereign wealth fund.
I don't want people making a decision on how much money they're going to give to a sovereign wealth fund and then decide, oh, we're not going to support Ukraine. We're not going to support some country where there's a famine and it's our job to go. We're not going to stop terrorists in some other country because we have an opportunity to invest in a sovereign wealth fund, which will make my numbers look better. That's why it doesn't work.
Well, I want to tell you politically, being against the people's dividend is not going to serve you well on the campaign trail.
Okay, that's fair. I
can assure you the people's dividend is very popular with the people.
I wasn't going out on the campaign trail anytime soon, but thank you, sir.